those who were involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening, roomies, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I am your host, Brooks Bigley, and with me tonight is Linn Browning, the author of Season 4, Episode 11, entitled Pertiet. How are you this evening, Linn?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to talk about this story with you. I think I'm excited to talk about every story with everybody, but it always feels super exciting in the moment. Right here, right now, right before the conversation starts. Where are you located at?
I am actually located in Central Virginia, which is also the setting of the story.
Yeah. I liked the, you had included, or I think you were the one that did, but in the script originally, you had included some bits about like where their accents were from for the characters. So yeah. I really appreciated that instead of just generic setting, generic characters. Go ahead and talk.
Right.
So yeah, that was a great touch. How is your weather out there, by the way?
It's actually nice enough today that we opened up the house. It's windy, but it's always windy at this location for whatever reason.
Do you have a fire pit in the back that you burn all of your stuff in? Is it good weather right now for that?
It is not good weather for fire pit.
Okay.
Because the wind would probably bring it farther away than we want it to. We haven't burned the pit in a long time. The instance that actually spawned the idea for the story was actually we were getting rid of a couple of couches, and it was going to be much easier to throw them in the fire pit than it was going to be to try to get somebody to haul them away, and they weren't worth bringing to someplace like Goodwill.
Sure, yeah. It's such an interesting concept. Where I live, it's very sort of suburban area right outside of more urban, areas. And then we've got farmland to the north of me, but I don't know if that's like a practice out here in California that, even if you have large acreage of land, I've never seen like a fire pit or like the smoke from it. So I don't know how, maybe we just have stringent rules.
Probably not in California.
Right, we just got too many rules out here. Plus, we have constant wildfires, so we probably, I'm answering my own question now. I'll stop. There's a reason we don't have them. So anyway, so your story, there's a string of really well done and beautifully crafted relationship stories, I feel, this season. And you're an example of yet another one where you've taken the time to kind of flesh these characters out in the moment of what they're going through, that we care what's happening, we care what they're thinking and why they're ping-ponging off of each other.
Thank you.
The way that we are. And so you definitely layered some incredibly personal feelings, I think, over just a general scary, what the fuck just happened kind of scenario. You told me that you started with the seed idea of you and I guess your partner burning couches in your own fire pit.
Right.
Ultimately, how did this story start with you when it first became apparent in your head that you wanted to write it?
Interestingly enough, I primarily write fan fiction, and this started as a fan fiction piece.
Was it fan fiction for us or just in general for like how?
It was Grand Theft Auto 5. Trevor is Trevor Phillips.
Yes, awesome.
So yeah, I was writing it as kind of a slice of life experience for him getting clean and settling down with this girl.
Okay. Nice. Did you tell that to Graham at all? Because now in hindsight, I'm like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. When Graham,
no, I didn't.
Who plays Trevor, it was like he knew that. He kind of sounds almost like a gruff version of Trevor. How synchronistic.
The notations that I had put in the character stuff say that he is Canadian by way of New York. So there's a reference to the fact that he's Canadian, but that's as far as I went with it.
Well, that's also Graham's real life as well.
Right.
So everything is converging perfectly here.
It worked really well. I found the Grey Rooms because of Graham to begin with, like everybody else has. But I started out with SCP Foundation and followed him from there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting anthology show as well.
Yeah, I love SCP Archives. They are so cool.
Yeah, I was a fan way back in the day when I first discovered the website. And then, I even tried contributing myself, but I guess I never either followed the rules properly or just didn't convincingly make a scary creature because there's different ways that they vote on everything, and I never had mine actually accepted. But hey, whatever.
But that's how I found the Grey Rooms, was through Graham. And so to have Graham doing Trevor was just like... I was fangirling really hardcore. I was really excited to have him in my story.
Yeah. Well, so then take me to the beginning. So you were writing this fanfic about Trevor from GTA 5.
Yep. It's actually, if anybody's interested, it's available on Archive of Our Own. All of my fanfiction is there, so the original piece is there. It was originally written as a romance story, where he gets clean and kind of settles down in this area and just kind of lives out his life. And when the Grey Room stuff came up, it was like, I need to find a story that, because my writing is almost always character driven. And I had to find something where I could kill the characters, which, when your writing is character driven, is really difficult to find.
Right.
And I was looking at the experiences of that fire pit and the exchange between Bee and Trevor that any fantasy writer who's written about hell must have spent some time staring into a trash fire. That is actually taken from a conversation I had with my partner when we were burning that trash pit. And it was this thought that if hell was going to break through, that would be a place where it could do so without it being immediately noticed.
Interesting. So you're sitting at your own fire pit with your partner, looking and the flames dancing around, and it just struck you that for hell to come in, this is a perfect door. This is a perfect entrance.
There was a spot in the fire pit where we still don't entirely know what it was. There was a spot that looked like fire was spiraling out of a hole. And it probably was a log that had, because of the way it had burned out from the inside out, the outside was still burning and the inside was gone. So there was air moving to spiral it out like that. And that tornado of fire was it stuck with me for so long after that.
Yeah, I remember in my earlier years when I had first moved into a house that had a fireplace, I very much took pride in being the guy that could get the fire going and then keep it going for many hours, warming the house, versus just the average person maybe burn the log is done, maybe put another one.
Single log,
we're
done
finished. Now. Right, exactly. Yeah. There's no, outward thought past that, the ritual of keeping a fire going, of how to keep it stoked and what to put into it, what not to. Never put a pine cone in a fireplace. I learned that as well. Holy shit.
Or wrapping paper.
Oh, really? Why wrapping paper?
Because it's light and it sets itself on fire and goes up the chimney.
Ah, it'll float. That's it. Burning embers.
And that is actually how my partner set his roof on fire.
Oh, no,
in real life. Years ago.
Oh no. Well, and so in your story, there's so many allusions to other things outside of the actual. So the actual story itself took place, it seemed over a couple of days. Yep. But there was so much more being, alluded to that happened prior. The barn fire, some kind of thing that Trevor did to Bee that caused her injury, based on some kind of meth-laden rage that he had, or from him coming clean from it, I guess.
Yeah.
How did you kind of decide, I've got this fire pit, I want to kill this character, now I need to start layering their lives around it? How did you determine the relationship between Bee and Trevor? How did you ultimately start to kind of unravel the themes here?
Trevor started long before the fire pit. I had been writing those two characters as a relationship for probably almost a year before I started this piece. And when I had originally written it, it was just Trevor and Bee burning a bunch of shit in the backyard. So to move it, and all of the elements that are present in their relationship, with the exception of some of the character development for Bee, I actually developed her a lot more for this than I did for the original piece. Their relationship was already set because I tried to imagine what it would look like to take someone as unstable as Trevor and try to make him come clean. So I'm about, how to say this? I try to write, especially because I write romance for the most part, I try to write my romances realistically. I don't like the idea that you would romanticize something that's not real. And I didn't like the idea of romanticizing what would have started as an extremely toxic relationship, because it was for them. There was a lot of damage on both sides that had to be resolved as they grew into a couple. And I had to find a way to shrink that down to fit into that small space for the gray rooms.
Yeah, I like in the beginning you did a really good job at just swiftly setting up kind of, and this is where we're at now, kind of, describing, you get the gist right away, like they're in a relationship, they do love each other, but something happened between the two of them. Also on top of that, she is, she's not going through the motions. She doesn't seem to portray any kind of sadness about anything, but she for sure has the upper hand because she's kind of like the rock for their relationship. It seems like she's the one taking care of him at this point that we get into the story. And like how she said something about, everyone wondering why she didn't just marry another, country bumpkin like herself. Instead, she basically went and got the absolute polar opposite of who she was. We don't know why per se, and it doesn't matter, but it's still indicative of something. Like you're saying, maybe within her, something else was broken or damaged. She was trying to fix that by entering into her. I mean, come on. She found him on the street and he was on meth. Yeah. I mean, so she clearly saw something, but also took a chance that maybe the average person wouldn't be taking. They'd just dismiss,
Right. And one of the things that doesn't show up in this story, but is iconic to who Bee is that her purpose is to be of service to somebody. If she can do something that will improve another life, regardless of what it is, if she's capable of doing it, she will. She never felt like she fit in the area where she is, which is why she didn't just choose one of the neighbors or one of the regular guys that she went to school with, because she wasn't like them. She was always more independent, more capable than just settling down and having 15 kids and being a housewife, which is kind of what was expected of her. And because of that, she took on the process of this house of her own, her family land. She took that element and made it larger than it would have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she was fiercely, she wanted to do everything herself. She was very independent, even when it came to like carrying the buckets and filling the buckets with water to try and continue to put out, the fire in the pit. And Trevor's like, let me do this. She's no, it's cool. I got this. I can, and she even says, when she's narrating that, like, she fills up the buckets halfway because it's easier for her to carry. So she's not looking for like, oh God, they're so heavy. Will someone come save me and carry these for me? She's just pragmatically going about her business, taking care,
the buckets are actually was a learning process for me, because when we were working with our fire pit, I was prepared to fill them right up to the top because that made logical sense to me. I am not from the country. My partner is.
Yeah.
This is his area. I grew up in the suburbs. So in writing Bee and Trevor, I did a lot of juxtaposition. I kind of switched some of that So that Trevor is the one that doesn't necessarily know what's going on, but Bee's been doing it her whole life. Like my partner's been doing it his whole life. So I put some of his words in Bee's mouth a couple times, which was kind of entertaining.
Yeah, it really shows that she was in charge of herself as well as probably, the greater relationship, I guess. I mean, she definitely, like you said, she is like she was in service to him, but not necessarily. She was just getting him through it.
Yeah. She knew that bringing him into her life, which was an established life and a steady life, was something that was going to improve his life. So she took him in the service of making his life better. Except that Trevor, being Trevor, was going to make that implode. He was never going to make that an easy relationship.
Right. At the very end, he said that too, as Fire Trevor, that he was just doing what he had always been doing. He was, trying to self-destruct.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because there's this whole notion of the fire pit, like the fire pit is its own entity almost. It's like this third person in the story that it's like the linchpin of their relationship captured in that moment that we're hearing the story.
I actually meant to tell you this, and this is important specifically to you. I wouldn't have written this story if you had not put out a challenge that fire should be the scariest part of a story.
Oh, when did we put that challenge out?
That was probably 2 years ago in one of the Discord channels. You had said, I would love to see a story where fire is the villain.
And you mean me personally? I said that.
That's what you said.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I thought about that, and that's what it was. I was trying to remember what started me on thinking about the fire pit as the bad guy. And that's what it was. It was that comment from you that I started thinking about it as, okay, so what happens to this fire pit that makes it more active in their lives directly? Because a fire pit is pretty passive. I mean, you throw stuff into it and it burns. And sometimes it spreads a little bit and you just do what you have to make sure it doesn't spread too far. So it was because of that conversation that I ended up coming up with the idea that the fire pit could be that additional character.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can't remember like the very specific situation, but I feel like you are kind of sussing out that memory of mine that I do recall there being chatter in the earlier seasons of like, well, what can we do differently? Authors asking, what could I write about differently? And I'm pretty sure I remember now, saying something to that effect of like, if you don't worry about monsters or evil people, what about fire? And I think it was because at the time we were having the wildfires here in California. We didn't have any last year. Sense. Yeah. It was in 2020, although it wasn't as bad. Because that was during COVID time, so I think I would have probably died internally had I known the wildfires were coming and we were still locked down, though we couldn't leave the house. So that maybe 2019 or something, we had massive wildfires back then.
I think it was, because I still remember that conversation very clearly. For me, it was a seed of this story.
Hey, that's so awesome that I could have, I guess, given that idea to you. And yet funny how to up to today, like I didn't get the sense itself that the fire was this evil thing. To me in the story, the fire just represented almost an extension of Trevor's progress, through his becoming clean.
Yeah.
When you reference, Gehenna still burning and that whole biblical reference of how sinners, kind of almost like a purgatory before hell where they can still, they still need to atone for their sins. And he for sure was in that. And maybe, he didn't know because when Bee made that comment about, Gehenna still burning, he was like, what are you talking about? But yet he seemed to very much identify with this fire. He wasn't consumed by it. He literally was at the end, but he wasn't obsessed with the fire through the story. Although as we got towards the end, it was like he was being called to it. And had to interact with it. And like, we ultimately don't know what happened, but he became part of the fire, you know, in the end. And that was almost like maybe his final atonement before heading off to hell. I mean,
that was kind of what I was aiming for.
Okay, so like, how did you then get that all together? How did that all come together for you? Are you religious, or?
There are actually a lot of pieces. There are a lot of moving parts to making a story. When this was all based on, like I said, the fire pit that we have out in our backyard. But we had when we did the couch burning, it didn't go out for like a week and a half. We couldn't get it to go out. It just kept burning. And that we did actually call it Gehenna. We were talking about Gehenna. We both knew what we meant. But when I was going to put it into words for Bee explaining it to Trevor, I needed to have the exact definition. And I actually learned a lot about Gehenna in the religious framework when I did that. The idea that it is a place where sinners go. It's like purgatory, but a negative purgatory, where you have to suffer before you can continue on to suffer in hell. And it was this additional layer to the multiple levels of hell that my partner and I were used to thinking about. And so we both learned a whole bunch about Gehenna before I could actually write the piece.
Do you think that when you were writing, you know, Bee's character, like what made you put in her this undying love for Trevor? I mean, he clearly, you know, she met him on the street somehow, I guess fell in love with him, or they started their relationship. She wants to get him clean. He even, in a fit of, you know, drug-induced rage, he hurt her somehow. Like, she's conscious of the possible embarrassment behind that, you know, because of the county that she lives in, you know, knowing about that. Charlie, you know, asking those questions over the phone. Are you falling down any stairs lately? She never seemed to complain to Trevor or come at him negatively. She was a very uplifting and positive addition to his life. I mean, were you intending that she kind of just was this selfless person to him because he needed that, or because she needed that, or like where were you going with that? Because she, in the end, she chose to you know, piss off into hell with him. Basically,
it's hard to explain because there were so many levels to their relationship before I wrote it. The decision that she didn't intend to fall in love with him. In the original story, Bee found him in a situation where he was essentially going to die if he just stayed on the street any longer. And so she said, you come home with me. You can stay in my house. Just don't. All I ask is you don't kill me.
Right. No meth labs.
I mean, and she was very honest about it. Was what you need is a place where it's safe to be who you are and get clean. And part of that came from me as a person responding to the original character of Trevor Phillips. Because there are present in game several places where he's kind of pathetic. And it's loneliness that you see. It's depression, not just him being psychotic. There's more depth to that character than some people will put on him. And because I've gone through depression and because I've gone through the loneliness of not having a connection, I really identified with that. And that's why I wrote the fan fiction. So Bee, in this version, still pulled him out of that dark place and told him, when she tells him that he has to brush his teeth, that was part of their original agreement. All she wanted was, she said, as long as you bathe and brush your teeth and don't kill me, you can stay. The added no active meth labs was a later addition after the fire in the barn.
Yeah, it was like a self-deprecating way for him to acknowledge everything, right. It seemed like. Yeah.
Yeah. because he burned the barn down, not because he wanted to burn the barn down, but because he was trying to make meth.
Oh, I didn't even connect that.
Yeah, that was the intent.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
I for some reason I was assuming that it was either just a freak farm accident or maybe a different fire pit had gone awry and burned the barn down.
Nope, this was definitely a connection between Trevor and the drugs and fire. He was the cause of that fire.
And that makes it doesn't really change my mind about the story, but it for sure it makes me feel like this ending it was definitely a tragedy then, because she's trying to metaphorically and literally pull him out of his pit.
Yep.
And doing everything she could to do that and being a good person about it. I didn't get the sense that she had any ulterior motive for it. And yet in the very end, he was still himself and he pulled her down into his pit, literally and figuratively.
Well, and one of the reasons that worked, why she went with him, was because his differences made her differences in the world more comfortable. She felt like she didn't fit in her own setting, and so to have a misfit with her made it tolerable. And so the idea of having to stand there and listen to all that tut-tutting and the paternal, well, we should have seen this coming, reactions from all these people that have known her whole life, she couldn't stand to think of that. And that's why she went with him, because her life was not going to be right if he wasn't in it.
Right, yeah. She had said how he was rough and gruff, just like her land, but also that he made it bearable, and so, yeah, it seemed like her function was to take care of something, be it her land or be it him. Not needed, I had to find a different word, but she definitely had a calling to fix something. Like they always say, if you can't do for self, you teach, right? Or if you can't fix yourself, you fix something. You will endlessly focus on fixing other things when you're not able to fix yourself. And so it seemed that she was definitely on that path. But, she could have said no and ran away from this fire Trevor that's crawling out of the pit. I mean, he wasn't threatening her, so it's not like he forced her to do it.
It was always her choice. And every aspect of their relationship was about choice. She chose to stay with him even when he hurt her, when he burned down the barn. She chose to stay beside him because the risk was worth it.
Yeah, there's a nobility behind it, even though she was burning herself. And like yet another, theme, like, you play with fire and you get burned. And she was constantly playing with fire by making those choices at each point. Met this guy who's on meth. I should walk away, but I didn't. I burned my barn down. I should walk away, but she didn't. He knocked me down the stairs somehow, but, didn't leave.
Yeah, the knocking her down the stairs that was a really hard piece of that story to write, partially because not many people have a deck off the back of their house the way I do. It is a literal, it's like a 10-foot drop off the back of the porch. And that's what he pushed her over. He pushed her over the edge of that porch and she fell. And it was because he was pissed off about something. And at the time, he thought it was really funny.
Very unfortunate. Even when he snapped at her, when she's asking about him taking his medication, like he was so quick. I think that burst of anger, and she's like, where did that come from? That must have also been even worse under the influence of meth, basically. What a tragedy. There's always a little part in me that's like, when I'm talking to authors, I'm like, yay, there was some resolution here, yay. But no, we kill the characters. And as much as we might like some of the characters going into something, there never is a happy ending, but yet
not with the Grey Rooms. The Grey Rooms doesn't give happy endings.
Right. But yet I'm trying to figure out how to say it properly, is that you gave me almost hope through the story that somehow there was going to be a happy ending, just because at every point she's trying to help this man. And in the very end, I don't know what I was expecting. I didn't expect her to run away in fear, from Fire Trevor, but I also didn't expect her to just be like, I love you and let me embrace you and catch on fire. Yeah, here we go. Jump into the hills together. So yeah, that to me, that's like, there's a beauty in that. Like, she chose at the very last moment, she still chose the love of this man who had done her wrong, but I get the gist that he, in his broken way, he did have love for her. I mean, it was apparent in how they exchanged.
When he was conscious of his actions.
Yeah, right.
When he was conscious of his actions, he regretted hurting her, ever. And that was the difference, was that when he was conscious enough to make a decision, he would never hurt her. But when the decisions were taken away from him by the meth, that's when he hurt her.
Whew. Such heavy topics here.
Well, and it's funny because that particular topic comes up too. When I was in college, one of the books that I read, my first good books class, it's literally what the class was called, was good books. And the first undergraduate class I took, we read 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. And that book changed the way I looked at character development. Partially because I absolutely fell in love with the wrong character. In the story, Pete is supposed to be this foil character for the good boys. He was a musician who wanted to be a famous musician. He was a guitarist. He was going to have this wild life, but then he fell in love with Rose, so he kind of settled down to live and work on this pig farm that he really didn't want to do, but it was not the life he had chosen for himself. And to escape the life he hadn't chosen for himself, he drank. And when he drank, he beat his wife. Except he only did it once. I think he had hit her a couple of times, but there was one time he hit her hard enough to break her wrist. And when he realized he had done it, he never touched her again. And he spent the rest of the book regretting that action and trying to make up for it. And that's why I fell in love with that character, because it embodied this idea of, even when somebody has made a horrible mistake, if they recognize it, they can change who they are. It's the decision to change your future decisions. It's that turning point where you look at your life and go, okay, I hurt somebody I care about. I'm never doing that again. And sticking to it.
I wonder then what precipitated Trevor ultimately deciding then to join with this fire pit. Like, did he determine that he wasn't able to atone for what he had done to Bee, or was this his way of just being like, man, I really just fucked everything up, so I need to go now. We won't. I guess we won't know unless you tell us.
I will tell you, because I do know.
Ah, yes.
He looked into that fire and said, if I go in, maybe the fire will stop. Maybe it will stop making Bee look bad. Maybe my leaving this world will change things for her for the better. He was wrong, and he realized it once he was there. But his hope was that he could protect her somehow by going into that fire.
Right. In a way that he was not able to protect. He didn't protect her from himself, because he, a sober him could not protect her from when he was under the influence of meth.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that makes sense. And this is almost, gosh, then you almost might think that he did finally atone. Like, just choosing to go into the fire and become one with the fire was almost his way to atone for what he did, by accepting the fact that what he did was wrong.
What he was hoping for. And when he got there, I think he realized that the enormity of what Gehenna is, the reality of hell, was never going to be satisfied with one man's very small concession, which is why he said, I fucked up. I couldn't fix it. My atonement wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be alone. I'm getting sucked into this anyway. Please come with me. I don't want to be alone.
Oh, such tragedy. Even just talking to you has made me see even more points about the story than what I knew from reading it and from listening to it several times. So, your story is very intense.
Thank you.
How did you feel about hearing it? How did you feel writing this piece and then it being turned into actors and sound and, music?
When it dropped for Patreon, I normally get up around 7 o'clock in the morning, and it dropped at like 6 Eastern. And I took my headphones and I crawled back into bed and I pulled my blankets up over my head and I just listened to it. No cats, no partner, nothing to distract me from. And I have really good noise canceling headphones. So, I was completely just there listening to it, and I cried. It was a truly amazing experience. Between the actors' voices, and JM is a master. I mean, the music. I know I embarrassed him once in Discord because I compared him to John Williams. Because John Williams' music for me is like the epitome of emotion.
Can you tell everyone who John Williams is?
The Star Wars, all of the Star Wars music is John Williams. The Jaws music is John Williams. He did most of Spielberg's stuff in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. He continues to do work in he did the Indiana Jones, all the Indiana Jones music. Pretty much, if you can hum it, it's probably John Williams.
Yeah.
And my mother and I, every time we see something that has John Williams music in it, we're like, well, we're going to have to see it because it's John Williams and it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to have to go see it. And there's nothing that makes me cry like really, really well placed music in a film or a television show. And Jam makes me cry. He does a fantastic job of putting the right tones in the right places, in crescendoing where he needs to crescendo, and in using the right kinds of instruments to evoke the right emotions. He's so good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. He's been on just an absolute tear. He's been on an absolute tear this season.
Yeah, he really has. So the music, listening to the music on my story was like, oh my God, there's music. There's music.
Right. Yeah, he's not just hammering together some stuff that he then places, against the story. He's really dialed into creating. He's pulling the music out of your story and then using instruments to play it. Is all I can say.
Yeah, and I am the type of person who has to tell everybody that I'm doing a thing because I'm very excited about it. So all of my coworkers know about the Grey Rooms now. Most of my family knows about the Grey Rooms. But whenever I described it, they would, somebody who doesn't know what a podcast is, let alone what a horror podcast is, they're like, so you did what? I said, well, I wrote a script and they are going to produce it they're making it into an audio drama with full voice actors, full music, sound effects, all of it. Original music. And whenever I say original music, there's this like dead silence for a second and then, really? Yeah. Original music.
Yeah. And there, I don't know how many anthology shows do that. I mean, I know that the No Sleep podcast does that. Brandon Boone, it's very similar that he gets his, and they're doing multiple stories. So, I mean, his job is infinitely even harder.
Right.
Multiple stories per week. But just to sit there, I couldn't fathom how JM can just look at the script, hear some of the audio that Jason puts together before there's any music, and then just know what to do. Like story after story, he just completely comes up again. Like I said, it's some magic, or he's just reaching into your story and he's just pulling the music out from your story and then playing it with instruments. I don't know how else to put it. I cannot fathom how that talent works, and yet he does it effortlessly. You know, I will always favor knowing behind the scenes stuff. He did something back in season 2, forgetting the name of the story. It doesn't matter, but he did the sound effect where he just hit a coffee cup. Like he just ding, like tapped it or something with I even forgot what it was. Gosh, I'm terrible at retelling this. But he then did all kinds of things to that and incorporated it into the soundtrack, into the music. And no one would ever hear that and go, oh, that sounds like someone banged on a coffee cup. Right. So just to think that way, to think outside the box, and that's the true talent, I think, of a musician, that you're not just like hammering away like, all right, I got to do an upbeat and a downbeat and a snare, and then I got to add a little melody here, and then boom, now I'm done. Like it's just rinse, wash, and repeat, whatever. He for sure just seems to just like, okay, everything disappears around me. There's only this story now. Make the music.
That kind of focus is incredible too.
Yeah. And yet so effortless. He's just is like, oh, here we go, guys. He's very humble musician. I've never heard him complain. He was, this is such a hard piece for me to do. Oh, this story is incredibly difficult for me to score. You never hear that from the guy.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it was really exciting for me to, on a personal level, I have been told before that my writing feels cinematic. I've had friends who have read some of my stories and say, I can just picture it. It just kind of flows like a movie. And so to have a story of mine that felt cinematic to me get the cinematic treatment as far as music went, that was so cool.
Yeah. Well, hey, as we draw to a close here, tell me more about your writings outside of the Grey Rooms. Like where can people find your stuff? You said you do more romance novels. Like what is it that you ultimately are comfortable writing in, and how do you go about it?
This is actually the first time I have ever had my writing purchased for any reason. So it's my first sale, my first production in that respect. I do have a novella that's available on Amazon that's self-published, called The Knitter and the Horseman. Again, romance, fantasy. I am working actively on world building for that world, and most of the other, I'm working on a couple of different novels. I have ADHD, so I have a tendency to be working on about 8 different projects at once and never finishing any of them. So there is material on, like I said, Archive of Our Own, AO3.com. If you look for Kijilin, Linn, Kijillinn. My fanfiction work is out there, and I'm very proud of a lot of that. Some of it I'm also ashamed of because it is still fanfiction.
Never be ashamed of your writing. Come on now.
But I like I said, I am working on trying to get some novels into some kind of readable sense. But generally, I don't have anything else out there to plug even, because what I have is one novella and this.
Well, I personally want to encourage you, I think, if you're up to the challenge, or if you even enjoy it, I don't know, I'm just supposing here, but definitely maybe pursue turning some of your writings into scripts that maybe you can start submitting, to other podcasts. Because there's, just outside of horror, there's plenty of podcasts that in the audio drama, sphere, that would probably love, like you said, you write in a cinematic fashion. That translates very well, I think, into audio.
I actually have an idea for a podcast of my own. One of the series of short pieces that I've done over a period of time. I've been writing with the Lockards are the family that I've been working with. And I've been working with those stories for probably 6 or 7 years without actually producing anything I can share. But their story would lend itself really well to a paranormal romance type podcast.
You should absolutely do it. I mean, it's very daunting to kind of start your own podcast versus, let's say, partnering up with maybe pre-existing ones, or looking for calls for submissions to then go about that direction. But yeah, if you've got like a super solid idea for a podcast, I would never tell someone, oh, well, don't do that yet. Put that on the burner, do something else. For sure, if you have that confidence, go with it.
I've got part of a script for an opener, basically. But the hardest part for me is getting that done, because I don't finish things well.
Right, yeah. I mean, I've said it a bazillion times to people, like, hey, just do the thing now. Just focus on it. There's nothing, multitasking doesn't work. Just eliminate everything else in your mind. Be like JM and just look at the single story. And, just finish the one thing. There's no other story for you to work on but the one story you're working on. That kind of mentality. That's helped me in the past.
But yeah, I think that's something that I would like to do eventually. It's just something that's extremely daunting, and, I work full time.
Right. We're not all just sitting around with all these ideas and just, having ample amounts of opportunities to focus on podcasting. Absolutely. I get that. But you are an amazing writer, I think. I really did enjoy reading your words, and then...
I do have one out. I did submit one for next season, too.
I'll have to go back and look through our submissions and personally find yours and take a look over it later. Nice.
I think it's called Mother of Monsters.
Mother of Monsters. Ooh, interesting title. Mom, Mother of Monsters. Well, it was great of you for joining us tonight, Lynn. I appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat, and I thank you for sharing your world with us here in the Grey Rooms.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really glad to have brought you on board. You're a very fun presence on Discord, chatting with the other authors. I really love the sense of community that we have going on, and,
so much fun.
You being a part of it. So I really hope that other people, hearing this will be encouraged to write things, just as you said 2 years ago, based on me saying, hey, make a fire the villain. We all learn from each other, and there's always a story to be told. Exactly. Everyone has a story, and they just got to get it out. They got to work on those tools to effectively, put it out into the world for all of us to consume, I guess. Well, as I said, thank you so much for your time, Lynn. And as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. May you languish, lament, and loathe, but always with love. #StayGray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Lynn.
All right, thanks.
And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition of Behind the Door.